So Soumya, I guess we could get started. It's 11:32.
Yeah. Thank you, people, for joining us again this Saturday morning. Saturdays seem to come by faster than one sort of expects these days. Time is rather strange and fluid. Anyway, so last week and the week before, we were talking about going beyond the curriculum for the older children and then the younger children last week. And before that, we discussed what was motivation and choice. I think the value of those aspects of learning. So now it somehow seems sort of logical that now that we have touched upon these things, what about we've said what are the various things one could do, for example, last time outside the curriculum and what that means. So how does one deal with it? Does one deal with having more physics classes, more chemistry classes, more art classes? How does it work? I mean, is it important that these things remain in their silos, or is it important that you mix things up together? It's not a very black and white question, because obviously specialization is a sign of progress and calls for some higher order application and skills. But clearly, it's also, one can also see at some level that there is enormous amount of value to be added in areas where one is well aware of other domains, other areas. Radha, for example, is an environmental scientist. And I think that's a classic example of a multidimensional and interdisciplinary area. So we'll start, Radha, with you. I'm not going to introduce Radha very much. I think many of our parents have been here before. Just check out our website. Radha has many years of experience being an environmental scientist and then as a teacher. And on the side, she's also a yoga person, by the way. So yeah, Radha, interdisciplinary, what does it mean and how does it fare in light of specialization? Please share your thoughts. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So when we sort of thought about talking about this whole thing of breaking silos, right? So the question is, what are these silos, right? And how do we create them? So first, let's sort of first understand when we talk about breaking silos, what are these silos we're talking about? So at a very simple level, at a level that is spoken about a lot, is what you were alluding to about the discipline that or the sort of background that one comes from, or the training that one comes from, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about the subject related, like a sort of a compartmentalization or a fragmentation that happens. Okay.
Right.
So it's kind of like a barrier or a boundary that's created, and that's very deeply embedded in our education system, in our psyche. We almost take on that identity, right? I mean,
right.
I'm a physicist, or I'm a chemist, or I'm a biologist, or whatever, right? So these are very deeply embedded compartments. So that's at one level, okay, which is at the level of education and career and jobs, etc., etc. But I think when we're talking about breaking silos in learning, it's also important to look at other boundaries and barriers to some extent that we assemble for ourselves, which is who do we learn from? Where do we learn from? Under what conditions do we learn? What context do we learn it, right? So I feel like these barriers are things that we create to almost, and then it gets embedded as we get older, of course. So we are very it starts at a very early age, and we are sort of we've already slotted ourselves into these compartments. So then, so that's the first thing. So the silos are at various levels. Right? How we learn, where we learn, who we learn from, all of that. What do we give primacy to? Which source of learning do we give primacy to? So that's also a big part of the silo thing, right? And then another important thing that I think is we should sort of look at when we're looking at breaking silos is also this question of, before we go to how do we break silos, it's also important to understand why do we need to break these silos? And why are we even talking about this today?
Right.
Why do we need to break these silos, right? So why do we need to break these silos is a large question, and it's a question of, for us to understand an issue or a thing or a phenomenon or an event in multiple dimensions. I wouldn't say all, because all its dimensions are, it's a very tall order, but even to know that there are multiple dimensions to something. Okay, rather than saying, look, I'm a biologist, so I'm going to look at this issue of water like this. So in my biology class, as a teacher, for example, in my biology class, I will look at water like this, because in the chemistry class, they're looking at it in other ways. But there's nobody in a school environment who's putting all this together and saying, okay, water as a whole, you know. So I mean, I think that's one of the things that for me is very
right,
important. Yeah, I think I'll sort of stop here for the moment, and then we can.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So actually, this is interesting that you sort of brought out this how we learn, where we learn from, that sort of a classification also, because that is part of the issue where children feel this is schoolwork and this is non-school work and this is syllabus. And I'm having fun. Why are you asking me a school question now? You know, that sort of sad sort of a siloing in a different sort of sense. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay. So yeah, Vishnu. So GenWise obviously has thought about this and we've sort of bounced things around a bit. So what would be your sort of take on where Radha has left things at this juncture?
Yeah, so I'll not come so much to the GenWise take right away. Vivek asked a very interesting question. I want to talk about that, and it's connected to what Radha was saying. So whenever something is there, right, say for example, silos, often there is a good reason why it is there. So it's worth understanding why these silos are there perhaps, and I'm going to share my theory and others can share what their ideas are. I think there are two reasons why these silos exist. Part of it has to do with how society, the economy, industry has grown, especially after the Industrial Revolution. Even before that, to some extent, there was specialization, but especially after the Industrial Revolution, as Adam Smith wrote famously about his pin example, right? The safety pin thing, and each person would do a part of that. Somebody would buff it and sharpen it, somebody would bend it. And in a way, that's a good thing because it increases productivity. And but it has its negatives, right? So if some of you are perhaps old enough to have seen Modern Times, Charlie Chaplin, right? So the cheap car or the cheap mobile phone is rolling out, and all of us can afford it, and it has certain positives. But in a way, it is also dehumanizing if you remember Chaplin in that film. So that is one of the major reasons, I think, for specialization silos. Because when you look at something, a part of something, go into it deeply, definitely there is a certain kind of insight which would not come otherwise. So there is merit in spending years studying math or years studying economics. But the best minds realized that they are only studying the part, and they would need to step back and integrate it into the whole. To take the elephant in the nine blind men analogy, the problem is not that the men were blind, right? Even with their sense of touch, I think they could make out a lot about the tail or the trunk and so on. The problem is they didn't realize that they were not looking at the other dimensions, like Radha mentioned. So the question is, so I think silos are sort of inevitable silos are not necessarily inevitable, but different perspectives are inevitable. The silo happens in the mind, right? So if you realize that what I'm looking at is just one perspective, and I must therefore now walk over, so I'm a biologist, I should walk over to the physicist's lab, or, you know, I'm in HR or I'm in production, I should talk to the salesperson. So somewhere perhaps as human beings, for whatever reason, you know, we tend to get attached to our perspective. So I'm going to stop there, but so I think there are two things, right? So one is perhaps this is how silos arise, but if we know how they are arising and we recognize the place of each perspective, then a lot more could happen. And I will come to the GenWise take after a while.
Yeah. If I may add something here, Samya, just in response to Vivek's question and what Vishnu just said. how do these silos get created also? That's one part. But the other point that I really sort of want to jump off of, Vishnu, is, you were saying about, say, as a biologist going across to a physicist, or just the thing is to know that you have to do that, right? So, I mean, like Soumya, we were talking last time, no, that these things start very early in life, and when we talk about learning, I mean, for all of us, we all see learning as a continuum, and we see it as a continuous process through life. But this very early on to recognize that one needs to be, that there are multiple dimensions to something, okay? So that understanding, and it also brings me back to that point about, wonder and curiosity thing, right? I mean, to be wondrous, to be curious, that, oh, okay, I'm looking at it like this, but then, what if I were to look at it like this? It's like you see children examining something, no, turning it upside down, everything. But as an adult, you're like, I don't know, yeah, I'm a sort of, I'm an economist, and I'll give you this answer, but you have to look to somebody else. Like, I'm not saying that as an economist, you should be looking at everything, but what I'm saying is to sort of say, can we look at it collectively? Can we look at it together? How do we, so sort of saying that from an economics perspective, this is how it appears, and then let's see how it appears from an ecological, social, historical perspective.
Yeah.
And yeah. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, clearly that makes sense. So, like Vivek has said, for example, there on the comments, yeah, this be like water is quite a, is quite something.
Yeah.
And
that's right.
yeah. So the logical question, I think, maybe for us in this context to move to is, so how does this sort of translate to children? How does this translate to working with children, with teaching, all your years of working with them? How does that sort of pan out?
Okay, yeah, that's great, because it might be nice to just use a small example, and then that way it helps, right?
Yeah.
So this is one thing that we've all sort of talked about a little bit, and working with children, and since I was teaching environmental science and biology sort of in part. The big question that we were facing in the school was, of course, solid waste. Like, everybody's facing solid waste issues all over the world. So the question is in the textbook, and so that this is also a chapter in their textbook on environmental science for 10th standard, I think. So look at it, and then the textbook says, oh yeah, solid waste management, you should segregate, you should recycle, you should reuse, you should do this, do that, and then keep it in 3 separate bins, and blah 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 blah. This is what you should do. Okay. So, and then of course it gets taken away by a corporation, it'll get disposed, it'll get treated, you have the whole shebang. I mean, you've given all of this thing. So then, of course, kids are sort of saying, oh yeah, okay, so we can do all this. And very meticulously, all the kids are, yeah, we can do this. And then it gets dealt with, we have somebody taking it away, and so good, it probably goes somewhere nice and everything is all hunky-dory. But then the question was, okay, so why are, let's sort of go beyond this, and let's actually get down and look at our own lives. Okay, so we said, okay, let's understand the solid waste issue in our school. Okay, keep this textbook aside. Okay, let's understand the solid waste issue in our school. So we went around, sort of did a what is called a waste audit, but we sort of did a sort of, which is the one thing that seems to contribute the maximum to the school waste. And it so happened that was biscuit wrappers. Okay, so then the question was, and then some of the kids were like, why don't we actually trace this whole thing backwards? Where it originated from, how much is there? And then we'll accompany this tractor which takes the waste out of the school, and let's go see where it gets disposed. So we went. Okay, we went on this expedition. So once you go on that expedition, the kids sadly realized when they went there that, oh wow, everything is collected and it's sort of dumped in one place. And then they spoke to the person there, and he said, yes, it's dumped here, and we dig a pit and it goes in there. Then it so happened that some of the villagers were around, and we were having a conversation, and they were saying, oh, this is terrible, and where are you from, etc., all that. So then we were saying, what is the problem and all that? They said, the smell, because when they burn this thing, it comes to our houses. So all this stayed with the kids, and then we came back to school, and we were having this whole discussion. We mapped this whole thing. And then when we did a backward, upstream and downstream sort of mapping, the kids suddenly realized it was this hide and seek and some other biscuit wrappers which were the culprit.
Right.
So then the whole thing shifted. It was we need to replace those biscuits. We want those chocolate chip biscuits, but we need to replace them because we don't want the paper, because this is what it's doing, right?
Right.
And so they understood like the social implication, the ecological implication, and their own habits. Okay?
Right.
And then of course it sort of snowballed into this really interesting thing where they wrote to the company and said, can we get it in tins instead of packets? Then some senior kids, the 12th standard kids, decided to make chocolate chip cookies in school. That was a big hit. And so eventually the kids came up with ways by which they could stop getting hide and seek in those
Right.
packets. So it was very interesting because you then suddenly see these other dimensions, because till then in the textbook, it's like a treatment disposal thing. But what is important is you segregate, you have 3 bins, right? But this really opened up. And this is a very, very simple example, but there have been other experiential learnings, right? You learn from, for me personally, there's somebody who comes to help me at home with the garden. And I know from my personal experience, I know from biology that when that pumpkin flowers, when you see the bulb, that's a female flower, oh, now you're going to get a fruit. And I also know cross-pollination has to happen. But then this guy, Babulal, who helps me, he said, you have to wait till that thing becomes a little big. Then you take that male flower and you do this, okay? And wait till that becomes a little big. So it's like, where are you learning from, right? You think, pollination,
right.
I know. So, of course, one could keep rambling, but I'm saying these are ways that we have to expand these dimensions. And the most important way is to gather as much understanding as one can about something. Curious, have that sense of wonder, and for children to create that, both as parents and as educators.
Yes, Vishnu, you were looking to say something.
Oh, wow, you're very sensitive. Even on Zoom you can make out. No, I loved Radha's example. In fact, I just shared a link to the blog post where she's sort of written about this and shared her thoughts around this. I think it's a very important example because it highlights how actually we tend to learn. If left to our natural devices, how would we learn, right? So, and which is what we do after school, right? As long as we're in school and college, we learn in a particular way. But after school and college, we are not saying that is this biology, physics, chemistry, right? We are faced with a problem at work. I may not be trained in child development or Montessori principles. For whatever reason, I may end up in a preschool or an early childhood environment. And then something happens. And then if I'm, I talk to someone, they say, hey, have you read Piaget or have you read Montessori or why don't you go and talk to that person, right? And that is how we learn, and that's very motivating, right? And a very simple example of this is, if I were to learn music, I would start trying out a song pretty soon. If I was made to learn the count 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, a rest, clef, note, this, that, I would give up, long ago. So what Radha, the example she has shared, because the children were involved in this real life thing, they were interested. Then after that, perhaps they went back to the textbook, the part maybe Radha didn't tell us about, and then they could relate to it. So I think the motivation comes from real things for most people. I'm not saying that motivation can't come from abstract things too. It can, but I think the most people are interested in the whole and a problem at hand, and I think that that's connected to interdisciplinarity. So coming now to a little bit of the Gen Y take or philosophy, and when I say Gen,
sorry, there's another comment from Vivek. It is in a class. Are you able to see it? In a classroom setup, is it possible for the teacher to think holistically? Going, taking off from Radha's water example, I guess. Radha, you want to take
actually, Vivek, this is a very, very pertinent question here, because again, you have a formal structure in schools, right? And so it's possible for the teacher to think about water in this whole way. It is possible, absolutely possible. the constraint often is how the teacher has to transact a subject. There is a curriculum, there is a syllabus. It's there it is, you know, that is where the constraint is. Okay, it's not the ability of the teacher to be able to think of, say, if we take the water example from a biology, chemistry point of view, it's very, and a lot of teachers do that. But one interesting way of doing it many times is to, and I don't know, and it is possible in the younger classes to do it actually quite well, is where, you know, teachers come together and decide on a theme, for example. And we've done it in 6th and 7th in the school where I was teaching, where you come together and you say the theme is water. And then, you know, in your social studies, whether it's history, geography, English, math, chemistry, science, everybody comes together and decides, if this is the theme, how do we teach this? Okay. And then after that, you have a little exhibition at the end of that month. Okay, where children actually put up little charts, etc. And you really see the teachers have collectively designed. They've gone back to their respective classrooms and they've transacted the syllabus. The syllabus has not been compromised. Okay, but together they've taken examples so that they are, in a sense, merging some of these so-called boundaries. Okay, so Vivek, that is done, and also I've seen it in what are called mainstream schools as well. So it's much easier in the younger classes, because in the older classes there are a lot of administrative and other sort of barriers that start coming in. But it's very possible, Vivek, and a lot of teachers do it actually.
Yeah, Vishnu, you can. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So, I would add to what Radha said. I think the important thing is for teachers to be aware of this need to give an interdisciplinary picture. There are certain challenges also. The thing is, you can't always be talking interdisciplinary, because sometimes it's important to get into the details of one subject and the nitty-gritty, the methods in that. So I would not say that, see, the other thing is interdisciplinary, especially at the older grades, it can sometimes become, it looks interdisciplinary, but then it may not be genuinely interdisciplinary. What I mean by that is you need to understand one or two disciplines in a fair amount of depth before you can be truly multidisciplinary. Now, Radha is, I think, truly multidisciplinary, but if she did not have the depth she had in biology, environmental sciences, then the depth of understanding would not be there, right? And then you can see it in organizations, right? So you can be a CEO or a general manager, but perhaps you already knew sales in a lot of depth, or you knew, production in a lot of depth. So you have to have known something in a lot of depth to really understand and be able to see connections. If you know only that thing in depth, that is also an issue, right? If you're in production, but you never spoke to a customer about a product issue or how they used it or what was the issue, that's also an issue. So it's not a very easy thing for teachers, but I think it's a manageable thing. So let me talk a bit about, and I think we are almost at half an hour. So let me speak a bit about, from the GenWise perspective, what are we trying to do? And when I say GenWise perspective, it's not that just GenWise has to do it. It's a larger vision point where I think parents, other organizations, everybody will collaborate. So, okay. So this analogy we are all probably familiar with is that when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So it's connected to the perspective one has. So we have a perspective, so we think that this is the way to solve it. And one example of this is I was in the early and mid 80s, I was growing up in New Delhi, and I used to travel by bus. And the Delhi government allowed private contractors to ply on these routes, right? And so these contractors would have some buses and they would compete with each other for revenue. So in that process, they would try to reach the next bus stop more quickly, and then they would drive rashly, and there would be accidents. Some people died too. So this was a huge issue. And at one point, one of the solutions they attempted for this was to install a speed governor, a technical device which would not allow the bus to go beyond, say, 40 kilometers per hour or something. Now, some years ago, this was there in the 2015 World Bank report called Mind, Society and Behavior. I was fascinated to see that Kenya faced a similar issue. And the way they addressed this was by putting up posters inside the bus, encouraging passengers to shout at the bus driver and give him the choicest, use the choicest expletives, saying, pagal ho gaya kya? What is wrong with you? Why are you driving like this? And apparently that worked very well, and far cheaper than a speed governor. So, yeah, the reason I'm sharing this example is to say that there are certain problems which lend themselves to a certain discipline. So, for example, there are certain things which can be solved quite technically using a certain design. The way you design a footpath or where roads join can have a huge impact on safety, for example, right? Some things are solved quite well through economic incentives. Some things require a very different kind of perspective. So, in fact, Rajesh, one of the co-founders of GenWise, and I taught a course called Tackling Wicked Problems a couple of years ago. Wicked problems are problems which are not technical problems. It's very difficult to define the problem. For example, traffic congestion, right? Whose problem are you trying to solve? Now, if you look at it from the perspective of math, it looks some way, economics, it looks some way, but somebody like Radha, who looks at our planetary web, nature, society, and individual track, would come and start asking questions like, who is the city for? Why do people live in cities, right? And if you do not ask such questions, then you are, sort of looking for the answers in the wrong place. So even to ask the right questions, even to see what is happening, you need some level of multi-perspectival sort of vision. So I'm trying to wrap this up pretty quickly. So what we are trying to do as GenWise, and it is a hard thing for us because at best we get 100, 120 hours of a child in a year. And I think that's not enough. Maybe it sows the seed. So one thing we've tried to do is we have these 5 curricular tracks, and you can read about it on our website. I will also share some links with you. So one thing we've tried to do is in these 5 curricular tracks, we have a certain set of important questions, and we've tried to run programs. So we ran this 100-hour program, 17 days into 6 hours in a few schools in Chennai and Bangalore, where children would come, they would spend 2.5 days in technology design and making, 2.5 days in mathematical and computational thinking, and so on. And the last 4 days, they did some kind of an elective, something they were more interested in. So that's a sort of a small seed. So what we believe is that almost everybody, at least till grade 10, should have a little bit of idea of these different disciplines. Sometimes on the face of it, it appears that they're getting exposed to these disciplines. But unfortunately, school math does not expose children to math really. I mean, there is a rare teacher who uncovers it well, but commonly it is more procedural. Definitely school history does not give you an idea of what history is about, right? So I think at a bare minimum level, every child should get a little bit of exposure to this. So I'm going to stop here. I'm sure there are questions, and I'm going to share a link to one of our early presentations. This is on slide share. And look at slides 11 to 15, where I have spoken about two young individuals who are probably 25 years old when this was written and now 30, 32. So these two case studies show you how these two people studied something, but they've been extremely successful in a field which required different abilities. And not having these abilities did not stop them from setting up these very successful companies. But because of the kind of exposure they had, they were actually able to see the problem or see the opportunity, which was far more difficult with a narrow sort of exposure. So I'm going to stop here, and yeah, we can take questions, or Radha, Soumya may have some comments.
Yeah, sure. So Vivek has another interesting comment about math being made optional at high school level in some states. Maybe is this happening in India? I'm not familiar. And any comments on maths being made optional in Maharashtra? Is it? I see. Okay.
Oh wow. Okay. Which class is this, Vivek? Which at what level are they? ICSE allows them to drop it from 8th, but at the high school level. Oh wow. I'm not sure what the reason could be though, but it just seems like some of these are such essential. I mean, there's a certain basic for at whatever level it is taught, but there's a certain basic set of subjects that would be part of at least up to the high school level. So I'm not sure what the reason is and why this happens, why this is happening at all. So
I have some comments and thoughts on this. Obviously, I have not looked at what ICSE or Maharashtra has done, and one would need to look at that. But having worked with governments a fair bit, I can guess. So I agree with Radha that a certain basic thing has to be there. At the same time, I would say that one can validly question some of the math content,
that's true,
which is there in even in 9th and 10th grade. And I remember that this SURD is there in many matriculation and state board syllabus. I'm not very sure. It needs to be there. One can argue whether quadratic equations needs to be there. Perhaps statistics is more important. So what I would say is, I think there is it's a very complex thing, right? Because some children develop fear of math, or they don't understand math because of the way it is taught. Sometimes there are some children who really, one could say that they perhaps don't need to know algebra at a higher level.
Correct.
So there are some systems, I think, which have taken a more mature view at it. So for example, I am aware that in Singapore and I think in Germany too, you can take 2 levels of math, even the Cambridge and IB allow it at the higher grades, right?
Correct.
So, so unfortunately, the short answer to the question is, yes, I do think that perhaps there can be deviations after grade 8, where either you can drop math if you have really done a good job of it till grade 8, or you could have a second sort of version of math, which is lighter and doesn't require something. Or CBSE is allowing 2 levels of math. CBSE is definitely far better than ICSE. The simple thing, I don't know if many of your ICSE parents out here, but the clear thing is that CBSE at least reviews its curriculum once in a while, does something. ICSE for the longest time, had not done many things. So I think there is a merit in having 2 levels of math, especially, and maybe other subjects. The government is not always wise. Sometimes they're wise and they engage with this, but often I have seen that when an interest group comes and lobbies for this, they tend to quickly go to the opposite, which is not what the stakeholders were asking for in the first place. But so these things tend to happen.
Also, I think it's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater sort of situation, because if you're talking about The difficulty is the syllabus. The difficulty is how it's taught. It's not the subject per se. So when you sort of throw something out, I mean, obviously, when decisions are taken at a level like that, I don't think there's that much thinking that has gone into the process. So,
And also, it's interesting. I'm sure many people will say why math often comes up here in this, this sort of a thing.
Exactly.
And poor math always is sort of
I
at
know.
the receiving end of this sort of thing.
Totally.
Now, I think one of the issues is also the fact that calculators are so much there, and why should nobody uses logarithm, log books anymore,
very true.
All that. Things have moved quite a bit.
Correct.
But perhaps our content has not. Discrimination is true. Although one can raise the same question about history, for example.
Exactly.
I mean, and that becomes a politically loaded subject also. But you'd be surprised how much emotion math can generate too. It's no less. So yes, So I think the math is covered a long way from the time 30 years ago, 40 years ago when we were true. Now, so but I don't know if the syllabus has kept pace. ICSE is like you say, seems to be just stuck in some sort of rut.
Absolutely.
But I also know other parents who see the IGCSE, IB sort of thing as a bit of a dilution. So that's another take also on that. Premises students who drop math are probably struggling with physics too. Can't go very far in math in physics without math.
Exactly. It's also, some of these things are also happening as a result of these international scoring systems and all that, where you stand in those tests. How do you perform in those tests? There's a lot of this dilution that's happening because you're comparing, performance of Singapore students or Chinese students with Indian students, with American students. I keep hearing these discussions a lot when people are talking about what subjects to, we were having this conversation with the ICSE, the ISC board once, when curriculum were up for revision, and they had asked us to, provide inputs on redesigning syllabus actually. So one of the things that came up was math, and the other one was history, EVS, and also physics, chemistry, biology. I mean, they were looking at everything. So one of the things was, but then, the question was, what should be the content? Because otherwise our students are not performing well. So there seem to be several other layers as well in this whole process. I'm not clear about
and Vivek is justifiably concerned about where will the scientists come from in a couple of decades. I think one is also accused of being a bit partial to STEM because of one's background.
Correct.
But yes, can ISRO still think of going to Mars? Fair enough questions. I don't think we have answers, right?
I don't think we have any. These are all, like we were just talking, there are also very many reasons why they're happening. Like Vishnu was alluding to, it's also who's lobbying for what is the, and like you said, political, it's also very.
No, and also there's the other end. I know that parents in the US, for example, other places, they are concerned that the math is not more like the Indian math. And we are concerned that the math is not, sort of thought-provoking and whatever, like the math that is there. I think that the sweet spot is probably somewhere in the middle. So the thing to do is to keep research on and keep it dynamic. While not going completely crazy.
Correct. And also, talking about, Vishnu, there's a quote there.
I love this one.
We don't have to talk about it.
Go ahead.
Also, this interdisciplinarity, when we come to, there's also the strengths of different things coming together, no? When you have, given the kind of computation and the problems that we're looking at today, and with the role of data, there's a way of thinking, no? If you talk about mathematics, it's also the way of thinking, a certain way of thinking, right? It trains you to think in a particular way. If you realize the larger skill that these subjects provide you, right?
Exactly.
Isn't it? So, there's I don't know, it's like kind of stepping back a little bit and saying, what is the role of these subjects really? And also they create these interdisciplinary things, which are like this hodgepodge hodgepodge of things, hodgepodge of subjects.
Mm.
It's not an organic evolution of an interdisciplinary area. Like say material science evolved beautifully from physics, chemistry, mathematics, all of that. And there was a felt need for it, and so material science evolved the subject. But these days, I mean, I think education is such a minefield. It's like,
I want to clarify one thing. So, see, some of the math we learned in school, yes, some of it is absolutely essential, and we need to be able to do that. But some of what we are talking about when we are saying interdisciplinarity is more about appreciating the essence of that subject more than knowing any particular method. So let me give you an example of that, right? So I never studied a formal course in statistics. Yes, in school I had whatever, those bar graphs and bar charts we did, binomial distribution, because I had maths in school. In engineering college, I never took a course on statistics. But I know that there is an issue if you are studying something, the sample should be random, right? It should not be chosen from one place or the other. Now, when we are having this coronavirus thing, there has to be a certain way of, whom do you test? It cannot be too small. So these kind of things unfortunately get lost when you get into certain procedural detail. And why is this important? So for example, I am not a coder. I've done very, very little programming in my life, but because I have lived with technologists and other people, I have a high level appreciation of technology. So for example, I know that a certain kind of problem is very difficult to solve in an elegant mathematical way, but I know that there are very good computational methods, basically a way of approximating it, right? So I know that I should talk to a computer scientist for this. For a certain kind of a thing, I know I should talk to a, environmental scientist or to a designer. To be honest, I did not even know for the longest time, and even now I'm only half clear about what a designer does, right? So, so design is a very interesting field, and I sometimes find that people from that field are not able to say what the field is about. Right? They only know certain methods and this thing because they have gone deep into that one thing. So that is, so I think when we are saying interdisciplinarity, perhaps we're talking of 2-3 things. One is to say that motivation is intrinsically limited to motivation for learning is linked to interdisciplinarity. And to survive or thrive in the changing world, when so many things change, you have to keep learning. Definitely, you need to have some idea of this, and hopefully to create a better future. And we could have a separate session on this, and Radha can talk about it a lot. A lot of the issues we face today is because of interdisciplinarity not being recognized, right? I mean, people are saying that COVID is because somebody ate a bat, but the issues are far deeper about the conflict between man and the rest of his habitat, so on.
Yeah. So Vivek says, how many people need to be tested in the COVID scenario?
Yeah. So I think we'll not try to answer that here. Maybe on our Facebook group, if you want, we can tackle that, and it's a good. It's a good math question to talk about. Yeah,
you need both math and stat. That's very true.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Do parents have any closing comments, observations that they've not typed in? I think the numbers are small today. If somebody wants to share, they're very welcome to unmute and share.
Yeah, you can just unmute yourself, share your video, and say what is it. Share.
Okay, that's cool too. I think we are done, right, Vishnu? Radha, do we have anything else that we want to say?
I think we're good.
I think let's just talk about the next week's. Maybe I can share that.
Please.
So the next 3 addas. So the next week we are talking about liberal arts, why it may be a good choice for many children. And one of our facilitators, Naveen Kabra, who has the exact opposite of liberal arts education, and even Radha, who's on that panel. So Radha is a biologist, environmentalist, and Naveen did his BTech, Masters, PhD, all in computer science, worked in computer science for a long time. But he has an argument that liberal arts, a more interdisciplinary program, maybe what is more relevant for a lot of kids. And so that's an interesting conversation we're going to have. The week after that, Dr. Bhushan Shukla is going to talk about coping with negative emotions. So it's a very important topic, especially among children and adolescents. And Radha will be back in the last Adda in July, where taking on from here, she's going to talk about the importance of experiences in learning. She'll be accompanied by Sukanya Sinha, one of our other facilitators. So yeah, that's it really for now. And thanks all for joining on a Saturday morning. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, people. Thanks for joining. I think we'll wind up now. Yeah. Thank you and see you again. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.